circles of support and peer support circles that Caliph and Christa organize, I think are very practical ways to successfully welcome our brothers and sisters back to the community and assist them in realizing their God-given potential, and also making it better for all the rest of us, that we've got a more peaceful, a more prosperous, and a more inclusive community. So thank you for coming today, and we appreciate you sharing with us what your knowledge is of restoring our community to the way that God willed it to be. So welcome.
Thank you, Conor. Thank you very much. I just want to begin with the story, and the story starts with this picture up here. This picture was drawn for me when I was a chaplain at the Dane County Jail by a young man that I spent time with. And while the picture isn't really part of the circles, the picture speaks deeply about the importance of faith. And the circles that Caliph and I lead, and we're going to tell you about, at the core, at the center of that is faith. Because at the center of the circles is faith, and faith surrounds everything that we do in the circles. Because faith, which is trust, which is hope, which is belief, is lived out in the ways that we think, the questions that we ask, the decisions that we make, the actions that we take, the thoughts that we have, and the words that we speak. And the circles are really about completely shifting the way a person thinks about themselves and their place in this world, and then assuming that role. So I just wanted to share this picture because it's lovely.
So what does it say? Bridge between?
Prayer is the bridge between panic and peace. Yes, that was written. That was given to me by a young man who was about 17 years old, and so is the man I'm going to tell you a story about. He was in solitary confinement, and I went and sat with him for about an hour and talked and prayed, and wasn't quite sure what, if any, value my time with him had. But there's always value in somebody caring. And there's definitely value in prayer. And he affirmed that. And I hold on to this picture. I love this picture. But so a question, how many of you have grandchildren or children between the ages of 15 and 18 years old? Okay. In the presentation today, we will talk about, we will reference children, and while 15, 16, 17-year-olds are considered teens, I have a 16-year-old son, and I still consider him my child, my baby. And so I want to start with a story about a 17-year-old young man. His name was Damon, and I met Damon in jail. The jail is the Dane County Jail, MSDF, they're all pretty much the same. They're pretty stale, pretty stale, pretty icy, pretty decrepit places. They have fluorescent lighting and often gray paint everywhere that is usually chipping. The floors are dirty. There's an odor that hangs everywhere. And Damon and I were in worship. And the worship space isn't really all that different. It's just painted a different color, painted yellow rather than gray. And Damon and I were in worship, and he's a young man. He has got dreads that are covering his face, sort of like just a full head of dreads, and they're covering his face. And I know they're covering his face because he wants to be invisible. He wants to disappear. He feels that hopeless and horrible about himself that he just wishes he could not be there. So we had worship, and after worship was over, I invited Damon to stay with me for a little while for one-on-one worship, for a one-on-one spiritual care session. And I learned in that session that the reasons that Damon felt hopeless, again, he's a minor. His mother has died. His father has never been in his life. His sister, as much as she loves him, cannot be a support service for him. Her life is in too much turmoil for her to be a good rock in this time of his need. He's homeless. He's working to make money, which means he cannot be in in school. And with all of that, he also has a baby on the way. And he's in this, is it the CIP? Is that what, I always get the acronym wrong. CIP program?
CIP.
And he's in the CIP program, which Caliph can explain to you in a little while. The CIP program is designed, in theory at least, to help people be successful, but it really puts somebody under the thumb of the government and keeps them under a very tight microscope. So all of his actions are monitored, and if he messes up again, the consequences are very severe. So this is why Damon feels hopeless. This is why Damon wants to become invisible. That day that we did one-on-one spiritual care, I violated a rule that exists in the jail or in any. I violated a rule. The rule is there's no touching. I don't know if you knew that, but you cannot shake hands, you cannot hug. A pastor cannot hold hands while they're praying with someone. But Damon is a 17-year-old boy who has lost his mother and who doesn't know what he's going to do. And so I held Damon, and he just sobbed, as we would expect, right? And I, as a mother myself, just mothered him in that moment. And eventually, Damon's situation in the jail changed. He was sentenced. When he arrived, he wasn't sentenced, he was awaiting a sentence. He was sentenced, and he was sentenced to, I think, 9 months or a long period of time, 9 months maybe, in the jail, and he was housed with the adult men. And thankfully, his sentence included Huber, which meant he had the right to leave the jail every day, to go to groups, to receive an education, to do things that would help him. And Damon ended up in our group. By the time Damon left our group, after many, many months of intense weekly care, he had his high school diploma, he had a job, he had a home, his child had been born, and he had a relationship with her. His relationship with the child's mother was healing. His relationship with his sister was improving. They had boundaries, necessary boundaries that allowed them to engage in healthy ways. Damon had hope. Damon had purpose. And Damon was excited about his future. We want to tell you today how that happened, and how it happened not just to Damon, but to most of the men and women, I would say all of the men and women, who attend the circles that Caliph and I have led. We lead them in a very non-traditional way. I mean, it's a very necessary way, but it's not traditional necessarily, and we will speak about that. And so that's why we're here today, to tell you about the circles and to ask for your support, to provide you information on incarceration and recidivism and re-incarceration in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee County, so that you have an understanding of why these circles are necessary, and then to ask for your support. So, as Conor said, and Conor, thank you for having us. My name is Christa Fisher. I'm a pastor. I received my education from an ELCA institution, and then for the last 5 years I've been serving as a chaplain in the Dane County Jail in Madison, Wisconsin. I recently left that position, and I've moved to Milwaukee this past weekend. I'm now officially a resident of Milwaukee. And I am eager to be here bringing this work to Milwaukee County, which desperately needs it, and to be doing it in partnership with my brother Caliph. Now I'll turn it over to Caliph.
Now, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
How are you doing this morning?
Good.
That's good. My name is Minister Caliph Muab'El. I'm formerly incarcerated. I went into the prison system at the age of 15 years old, and I spent 15 years in prison. 10 of those years I spent in solitary confinement in the worst prison in the country. And I grew up here in Milwaukee, and I went to prison from the 53206 area code here in the city of Milwaukee. Well, this is Wauwatosa, right?
Yes.
But you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, one of the things that was really pressing for me when I was in the Supermax was there were a lot of men around me that didn't want to see me in prison. They didn't want to see me in jail. They didn't want to see me in incarceration. And I was under intense forms of duress. I mean, the environment itself, I'm pretty sure made everyone sick that entered the environment, both the inmates as well as the people working in the prison. One of the teachers that was working there who became really influential in my life helped me get my high school education. And then I went on to do seminary in correspondence courses in the prison. Also got a law degree while I was in the prison and a business administration degree as well. And she was there, her name was Carla. And Carla would be the only person in that environment that would come in from the outside world that would treat us like human beings. And that, for that reason, I mean, just the fact that she would call me by my name, just the fact that she would say hi to me in the morning, she would look at me, not in disdain, but with empathy. That did something to me. Because it was really easy through all of the oppression that was going on in the Supermax. And I've seen people hang themselves, I've seen people beaten, I've seen guards do some heinous things to people in the Supermax. My brother right here was in the Supermax with me. They even did some heinous things to him in retaliation to me. We litigated a lot against the system, but Carla was taken away from us in the Supermax. And the reason why is because the guards came down on her about being too nice to the so-called inmates. She was showing us too much humanity, and they wanted her to be harsher. And the environment made her really sick, and she ended up in a mental institution. This is how the environment inside of the prison also makes the people sick inside the environment as well as outside the environment. One of the things that kept me sane and kept me motivated was the people around me. One of my greatest mentors who got me on the right track at the age of 15 years old, and lift him up in his space. His name was Black Moses. Black Moses taught me how to identify my triggers when it came to my anger. He helped me figure out the root cause of my anger. And he showed me how my pain does not have to be a detriment to my life, but that it could also be it could be something that helped me in my mission moving forward. Black Moses had life in prison. He had killed or murdered a police in Racine, and he was still full of hope. But I was an angry young brother because of so many dynamics that I grew up in. Single-family household. My mother was beaten by my father. My mother worked 4 or 5 jobs. She had 4 or 5 children, and men cycling through the home. She never was on drugs, but my father was. So those things, I was angry about those things and being disconnected in the community, and then coming into the prison and being further disenfranchised from my people. But Black Moses also ended up in a mental institution, and today he doesn't even know his own name because of what they did to him in the Supermax. So there are some psychological warfare tactics going on inside of the prisons here in Wisconsin, and there's an institutionalization that happens. There's something that happened to me that I had to look at very deeply when I was on the inside. And that thing that happened to me was I started to feel myself fill up with hate. I started to be very, very resentful to the very people that I saw in that prison because of the way they treated us. And I started to feel that, and it started to cause me great harm within myself. And I had to look at that. And I used to hear other people reflect my pain internally. And it used to make me think, like, wow, dude, is that how I'm thinking? I mean, is that me? I mean, they bang on doors. They bang on doors. Boom, 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 boom. F you, because it's a psychological warfare that's happening. And there's a battle going on inside of them that they don't know how to work with. They don't know how to fight the battle. They're not equipped with anything to fight that battle. And a lot of times they used to call me and say, hey, Brother Caliph, I need to talk. If I can count every time I had to talk somebody out of committing suicide, it will probably make all of you sick to your stomach. But when I came home at the age of 30, I didn't know anything about independent living skills. I didn't know how to set up a bank account. I didn't know how to send an email. I didn't know how to pay rent. I didn't know how to do the basic things that it takes for normal human beings to thrive in their adulthood. I knew nothing about adulthood. I went in at 15 and I got out at 30, and I was just thrust into the crevices of society without any kind of guidance or any kind of peer to help me walk through that initially. But I came into contact with an organization called Voices Beyond Bars there in Madison, Wisconsin, and what they had was a circle. It was a peer-run circle, and that peer-run circle had formerly incarcerated people in that circle supporting other formerly incarcerated people in the circle. And this circle used to have judges visit the circle, senators, lawyers, doctors, people that had housing resources, people that had great information about employment and things like that. And every week I would come to the circle and I would feel so connected. And then that's where I found my voice. The first time I told my story was 2 weeks out of prison. And it was just a big load on my shoulders, because being in a situation where you have no voice, and then having an opportunity and a platform to have a voice, meant the world to me. And ever since then, I've been telling my story all over the country, and I've been really sold out to the cause of mass incarceration in the school to prison pipeline. And today, we want to talk to you a little bit about how the circles of support work, what a peer circle is, what peer support is. We want to talk to you about how you can support, how you can get involved, and also the benefits of having the consistency in the lives of men and women returning home from prison. Because one thing that I want you all to pay attention to is that there's a repetition that happens inside the prison. It runs on a set cycle every single day, day in, day out, day in, day out. The bell rings, we stand up for count. Breakfast comes after we stand up from count. Then we go back to bed, we wake up for lunch. Then it's a shower in the cell. So sink, shower, toilet, everything is in the cell. The food comes through a slot. So everything is on a clock. It's a Rotarian kind of a thing. So when people come home and they're transitioning back into the community, and they don't have that kind of a structure, they don't have that kind of consistency, that kind of throws them off base. And a lot of them go back to things that they are familiar with and things that are more common to them. And our job is to interrupt that cycle of thinking and to introduce them to something different and to give them a greater perspective and a broader perspective on life and opportunity. So I'm going to turn it back over to Christa.
So Caliph just shared his story, and I told you about Damon. And these are not isolated stories. We're talking about an enormous population of people who are struggling with a lot of the same situations. Frankly, I would, as a pastor, I would bet that everybody in here has childhood wounds that they need to heal from. Everyone. The difference for many of us is that we hopefully had somebody in our lives that was willing to help love us through those traumas that we endured, those wounds that we experienced. And we had enough consistency and predictability in our lives that we could figure out how to navigate life even with that wound. Of the 88,000 people who are under supervision right now in Wisconsin, many of them did not have that. They didn't have the consistency, the predictability, or somebody who could just love them up all the time. So we often hear about 23,000 people that are in Wisconsin jails or prisons, and that is a huge number. Wisconsin really has a very high rate of incarceration, but we don't hear about the other 60-some thousand who are under supervision, who are at a high risk of returning to jail or prison. And this is men, women, and children. Again, you could call them teens, but I call them children. They're babies who are not supposed to be housed with adult men and adult women. So we're looking at close to 100,000 people in our state. In Milwaukee County, how many people here, just raise your hands if you are generally familiar with incarceration and do you know the term revocation? If you know the term revocation, raise your hand. Okay, good, this is great, good. I mean, it's not great, but you know what I mean. Good, okay. So as you'll see, we have, in this slide here, there's 750 people who are serving time in MSDF or awaiting a sentence. And then another, half of that number, a full half, they're on probation or parole holds, which is why when I say that there's 60-some thousand who are on probation or parole, this is a serious situation, and really right now these are the people that Caliph and I are working with. We don't have access inside the jail, but through the circles, it's Caliph and I and the Pastor Elvinger and the other folks who are leading the circles. These are who we are really trying to target, to prevent them, to help prevent, to disrupt the cycle, as Caliph said, so they do not return to jail or prison. Just want to point out just because I think it's really noteworthy, is that there's about 1,100 people a day in MSDF, and it was built to accommodate 460 people.
Why don't you tell us what MSDF is?
Okay, that is the Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. It is the jail here in Milwaukee County.
Right downtown.
Yeah, right downtown on,
Big, tall building.
yes, I was going to put it, yep.
Does not look like a jail.
From the outside.
They normally don't. Jails are normally, often they're inconspicuous. You'd walk by, you wouldn't even know you're walking by a jail. You could be down below having a cappuccino and a croissant, listening to live music on the street, going to the farmer's market, and you have no idea that at the top of that building is a whole different world where people are having radically different experiences. So again, of those numbers we just saw, 71% of people who have spent time in jail or prison are predicted to return, to recidivate. And now, these next numbers down below, it does not mean that 25% of people who go to jail or prison will return in 4.5 months. But of those 71% that will recidivate, 25% return within just a handful of months. Those first months are crucial because that is when, what are you going to do if you don't have a house, if you don't have employment, if you don't have transportation, if you don't have food, if your child support is backing up because you can't pay it, I mean, if you don't have access to your medication, the list goes on and on and on. You can only imagine. So, but within 2 years, if you are going to recidivate, you will most likely have found yourself back in jail or prison. And this is important for Milwaukee County because while 7,500 people are released from Wisconsin prisons into the state each year, nearly 3,000 people are released back to Milwaukee County. So if we want Milwaukee County to be a healthy place for everyone to live and to grow and to thrive, if we want a thriving economy, if we want a healthy social structure, then we need to be supporting the 3,000 people who are coming home and don't feel like they fit in. Do you have anything you want to add before I keep going?
That was great. I remember that still.
Yeah. I show this picture. This is early morning because the chances of somebody being up all by themselves, alone in this community, this very small communal space, watching TV, is pretty slim. Unless this is a solitary cell, and I know it's not. But if it were a solitary confinement cell, then you're allowed out 1 hour a day. So that person in theory could be having their 1 hour of TV. But it's just an early morning picture, but it's, just gives you a glimpse inside a jail.
Can I explain solitary confinement?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you take over?
Yeah, because I think it's, so when I told you guys that I was in solitary confinement for 10 years, I was in there not for committing an infraction in prison. Solitary confinement is identified as an involuntary non-punitive status. So they're saying that if you're in solitary confinement, that you're not being punished for a particular infraction, but because we think that you're a danger to the population and overall security and safety of the institution, by whatever standards they choose to rectify that by, they keep you in solitary confinement. So I didn't do anything wrong specifically. If I was to commit an infraction, I would be put in what's called program segregation, and I would be given a particular time period and frame that I would be released from segregation, be it a year, be it 180 days, be it 90 days. But solitary confinement is an indefinite period that they keep you until they feel that you have adjusted your institutional adjustment, and then they let you back into the general population. So I just wanted to be clear that I wasn't in solitary confinement because I did something wrong. It was because an idea of me having the potential to do something wrong, based on my influence that I had on the inside of filing lawsuits and getting the inmates to speak up about their rights and things of that nature, that made me a target, and they removed me from population and put me into solitary confinement. And they kept me there for 10 years.
Is that like another way of saying you were threatening the system by what you were learning and how you would help others maybe change their lives?
Exactly. So the DOC doesn't like influential so-called inmates because it upsets their power and authority in the prison system. So if somebody like me comes to the prison, they're going to be looking at me like I need to be removed or put into segregation because I'm going to have people speak up for injustices or atrocities waged against our peers. So yes, they will put you in solitary confinement for that.
So when you were released, were you released from solitary confinement?
Well, actually, I was released 2 years after I litigated my way out of solitary confinement. The court had ruled that they could no longer hold me in solitary confinement without a new infraction. And so the federal court ruled, I think it was Barbara Crabb, they ruled that me being in solitary confinement for an indefinite period of time without having committed an infraction was unconstitutional. So they released me from solitary confinement in 2008, and I came home in 2011. So,
Conor, we have until 10:45, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good, good, good. So this is just another slide to sort of indicate that this is a serious situation. Incarceration is a serious situation in Wisconsin, and the recidivism rate is so high that what we can make of this is that the programming that is offered inside jails and prisons, and it's minimal. I'm not discounting the intentionality and the desire of the people who lead those programs. But the programming that is in the jail is minimal. And the way that it is offered is, I'm gonna leave it at that. The programming is minimal and it's not effective. I'll just leave it at that. Just some basic information on just the general population. And now this is general population. Now if we were to look at Milwaukee County, some of these statistics would be different. So generally, 30% of people who are in jail or prison have no high school diploma or GED. That number's higher in Milwaukee County. I can't say how much higher, but it is definitely higher in Milwaukee County. Nearly half of the men and women who are in jail are parents. And that brings a whole new level of stress, of emotional stress, financial stress for the folks who are inside and for the folks who are outside. A quarter of the people who are in jail are young, very, very young, and they're just getting on the train, the incarceration train. 56% of people identify as ethnic or racial minorities. And that's, so, often we hear people say, well, that's not so bad. Half people are white, half people are of color, except that the racial minorities and ethnic minorities in Wisconsin are so small. So it's a very disproportionate rate of incarceration. And most people, 50% or more, have received sentences that are greater than 2 years. And there's a mixed bag with that, okay? If you're in it for a short period of time, you don't qualify for programs. People didn't qualify for our programs unless they were, inside the county jail, unless they were 6 months out. So the amount of time you spend in jail or prison dictates what programs are available to you. And the line for programming is so long that if you're there for less than 2 years, you're probably not going to get into programs.
Right.
And if you're there for more than 2 years, you may get into programs, but then the institutionalization that Caliph is talking about has been solidified within you, and your family has been horribly disrupted.
Not only that, though, sometimes the release of the so-called inmate is contingent upon the completion of the program. Well, if the program is not available and the slots that they had available are all full, then you have to wait out the entire duration of your sentence because of the unavailable program. So it also adds to the anxiety. Most of the people in prison, about 70% has been diagnosed with a mental illness called antisocial personality disorder. It's something that I was diagnosed with as soon as I came to the prison. Well, what that disorder is, that kind of heightened when I went to the Supermax, because you have me in solitary confinement and I'm in a room 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I can only be by myself. And these men and women, they're diagnosed with the antisocial personality disorder, which means that we really don't know. We have an awkward way that we interact with people. And it's kind of like a trepidation as to that engagement. Like, when I first came home, I just felt like everybody was judging me. And I had spoken to no one. I had a bracelet on my leg, and that was the monitor that would keep me, within the bounds of my curfew. So I had 7 to 7 curfew, and I knew nothing about Madison, Wisconsin. Granted, I never lived there before, and I had no transportation, but I had to go see my PO, the parole agent, who was all the way nether, far away from my house. But I made it happen. Because the only thing in my mind, I cannot go back to that place. I did not want anything to do with prison. One of the things that you find is that people who do over 10 years in prison, they have a lower recidivism rate than people who do under 10 years. Because the people who do greater stints in prison, granted they're institutionalized when they come home, but they have more anxiety around going back to the prison. And so they've disengaged with a lot of old friends. A lot of the old friends have fallen off. Some of them are in prison now, some of them are dead. And so the population and the circumstances change for people who do longer periods in prison. Like when I came home, going back to the old crowd wasn't even an option for me. It wasn't even in me to think about doing it. But the fact that I knew where no one was. After 15 years, I knew where no one was. Not even some of my family. So when I came home, I was pretty much solo dolo, is what we say. And I had to learn how to acclimate myself back into the community. And one of the conduits that allowed me to do that was the circles. Because people, everyday people, came to those circles. And I would interact with those people in those circles. And these were people that came from the community. These were some volunteers. These were notable public political figures. And if I can communicate with them, I can communicate with anybody. And the fact that they were able to look at the incarceration or the form of me being formally incarcerated from a human perspective, that made me comfortable in my interactions.
Another thing I want to say about programming is that, in addition to what I had said, a lot of people, full 50% of people who are in jail are there on probation or parole holds. They're on sanctions. They are not there necessarily for new charges. So they come in thinking they're going to be released in a couple of days. And a couple of days turns into a couple of weeks, turns into a couple of months. And so now, maybe you could have signed up for programming, possibly if it was available, but you didn't because you never thought you'd be staying, because there's no reason for you to be there. So because people have such a difficult time accessing programs, because the programs are so limited, because the staffing is so limited, in Dane County, there was one reentry specialist for 16,000 people. One person to help 16,000 people set up all these things on the left. Housing, employment, food, transportation, healthcare, get into mandated programs like violence, domestic violence programs or parenting programs, AODA programs, and to help them figure out how they're going to navigate probation and parole. Navigate the rules of probation and parole, and as Caliph said, just get there if you don't have transportation or if it's, So there was one person. So that right there is just set up for failure. There's no, and again, we just talked about the obstacles that people have before they come in. So they're coming from, generally from families that are also struggling with these same issues, that don't have consistent, reliable housing, that don't have consistent transportation, that are struggling to put food on the table and to keep the refrigerator full. So there are significant logistical obstacles, and then there are spiritual, emotional, intellectual obstacles as well. Do you want to talk to that, Caliph? And then we'll go into how we work on that.
Yeah, so, as I said before, we have come home with a lot of issues, right? But one thing that I do know is that most of the men that I was on the inside with had a genuine zeal to want to do something to give back to the community when they come home. Problem with that is that a lot of them set themselves up for failure because they get these grandeur ideas about how much they can do and how it's going to flow. They create programs in there. They're writing curriculums and things of that nature just to come home and the door's shut. And there's no one receptive to this individual because of their background. It took me about 2 years to just break through that barrier to success of being able to be accepted by the community, especially in Madison. It's a little bit more difficult, and I had to fight my way through a lot of things and a lot of obstacles and barriers just to get to where I am today. But it was necessary because it gave me the knowledge and the understanding that I then can use to help other people navigate through the same problems and circumstances. A lot of people on the inside know me, either from a radio show that I did or from me being on the inside and litigating so many lawsuits to improve the conditions of confinement on the inside. So a lot of people, brothers that come home, they already know who I am, or they've heard of me some kind of way, and they're inspired by what I've done and what I've been able to do after coming through what I came through. And for them, it's like, if Caliph can do it, I definitely can do it. I ain't spent no 10 years in no solitary confinement. And he did that. He came out, and now he's all over the country doing whatever he does. So that takes away the excuse. That's one of the things about peer support. We take away what's called the excuse factor, that you don't know where I've been, right? So you can't really say that to me, because I definitely know where you've been, and I've probably been there 10 times over. And so that takes away from, the defense mechanism that they put up. And the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So I can sit with you for 2 minutes and know if you're playing games with me. And I can weave through all of that stuff. And I can let you know straight up, and look, man, you're full of it. And that's not gonna fly here. I'm very firm with these men, am I not? I'm very firm with them, and they accept it. They're receptive to it because they know that genuinely, in my heart, I just want to see them succeed. I want to see them prevail over the obstacles of their experience. I want them to be able to learn and grow from their past so that their futures can be brighter for their families, for their community, and their offspring. That's imperative to me. And one of the reasons why I'm so sold out to this work is because I cover two populations. One of the reasons why I started Breaking Barriers Mentoring, Inc. About 7 years ago was because there were a lot of disenfranchised youth in the school and they were getting involved in gangs. The same thing I did when I was 15 years old, 13, 12, and that inspired me to speak to these young men. And I did that through Voices Beyond Bars. I worked with the Madison Police Department, their gang task force. I also sat on the county board gang task force in Madison, Wisconsin. And what we were able to do is we were able to pull those youth out of gangs. We went into the neighborhoods to these people that have these youth and telling them that they have to be a part of this and part of that. And I went to those men and I said, look, they're with me now, you can't do anything to them. I'm gonna need you to release the keys and let them go free. They're young and they have a whole future ahead of them. And we put those men back into school, those young men back into school. And that's what gave birth to Breaking Barriers Mentoring, Inc. And that's the school to prison pipeline also, because a lot of these youth become disengaged because the school don't give them what they need, right? From the curriculums, from the programs and the resources and things of that nature inside of the school. It's one of the things that caused me to be disengaged. But I'm also a peer to them also. And we build peers. And the goal is, with these circles, is to develop leaders. These are support and leadership circles. Our job is to also develop leaders out of these men and women transitioning back into the community. Because one thing I know that really settled and grounds people coming home from prison is to give them a responsibility, something that they can aspire to do better, and that can be measured, right? That's one of the things that made me motivated to continue this work. Somebody gave me a leadership role, say, hey, you Vice President of Moses. I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna figure it out. So I just went and talked to a bunch of people, did a lot of these presentations to a lot of congregations about Moses, and guess what? We were able to swell that population from 15 people to about 3,000 in 4 months. And it was just about the communication and getting people to become aware of the issues around mass incarceration. So our job is to develop leaders, to give people the opportunity to be in a position to lead, to understand what it means to have responsibility, and to take their responsibility very seriously, and to be held accountable. Accountability is a big thing. People didn't hold me accountable in my neighborhood. As a matter of fact, they encouraged me to do things counterproductive to my growth and development, but there was no accountability. What we do is we hold these men and these women accountable. We get them to see themselves. We get them to target what it is that's causing them to continue to relapse and to cycle through old behaviors, both mentally, spiritually, etc. We go back to the roots of the trauma, and that's imperative. And that's some people call that trauma-informed care. As a peer specialist, they train us in trauma-informed care. So I am a trained peer specialist, both nationally and statewide. I was trained by the state of Wisconsin as well in peer support, but it's important that we go to the root cause, because if we don't uproot, it's going to be real difficult to keep them on the right track. And like I said, consistency is everything with this population, and support is everything with this population. And we're not saying that we're glorifying violence or we're glorifying crime and that we're eliminating the victims from the equation or anything like that. What we are saying is that with that in mind, we want these men and these women to do better, to make better decisions so that there won't be more victims, so that there won't be more violence, so that there won't be more conversations about homicides and gun violence and things like that. We want to eliminate that from the equation and build leaders as opposed to criminals. And that's imperative for me.
Speaking of victims, and I want to talk about some other stuff with our group. Speaking about victims, one of the things that I've often heard in my the one-on-one conversations that I've had with the men and women who are in the groups is that when they are able to go back and look at the trauma that they have endured as children and as youth and as adults, because it's sort of ongoing, able to go back and really look at that trauma, it develops a great sense of empathy for the people whom they harmed as well, which is when healing and reconciliation and growth and transformation begins to take place. The circles that we lead, as Caliph said, are the weekly circles. The ones we led in Madison, they were weekly circles. Every week we met for 2 hours, and they were peer-led. Caliph and I co-led the circles. I have not been incarcerated, but I have spent a significant amount of time inside the incarceration institution, and I can relate to Carla and her breakdown. It is a very traumatic place to be working. You are a constant bystander to trauma. And I have my own experience there. We address logistical needs. So the first thing we do is we provide people with a reentry plan, which is a book that we've created with where we ask people to identify all of their needs and then to rank those needs, and then we figure out a plan A for addressing those needs, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, because your plan A is probably not going to come through, plan B might not. You have to have a backup after a backup after a backup. So, and we connect with organizations in the community, we bring specialists in, we have people on speed dial who can help with housing and employment and transportation, helping people get their ID, their social security card, or their driver's, or their vote, their state ID, the different sort of things that they need. So logistical is primary, but it's not the only thing that we focus on, which is what generally reentry specialists focus on. As they're able to, they help with the logistical needs. We also address the intellectual, the emotional, and the spiritual, and I left physical off. We address the physical as well. So one of the reoccurring themes that I heard while serving in the jail was that, especially among the African American men and women, was this sense of rootlessness. I don't even know who I am, because I don't know who my people are. I don't know where I came from. I don't know where my ancestors came from. A continent, yes, but it's a continent. I don't know how they got here. I don't know anything about my history. I know nothing. So one of the things that we did in this group was we spent a lot of time teaching people history, a really accurate, fleshed out history to help people better figure out who they are and who their ancestors are, and and help them really gain a real sense of strong identity. So that was one of the intellectual components. As Caliph said, we really work on getting to the root of the trauma that's causing this, whatever it was that landed somebody in jail. And the women's group, was much smaller, so we could do things a little bit differently. And I don't know if anybody here has ever read Women Who Run with the Wolves. Anybody familiar with that? Yes. So we used that as part of our curriculum. It wasn't the whole curriculum, but it was part of the curriculum. And that really works on, that again speaks to the wounded child. Spiritual. Everything in the group is spiritual. And if you were able to hear Caliph speak, not in this environment, but in his real environment, everything is deeply spiritual. Caliph, if you ever have the opportunity to hear him speak on a spiritual level, I encourage you to do it. You will want to come back again and again and again.
Preach it, bro.
And physical, I didn't include that on here, but when you're in jail, there's very little opportunity for physical exercise. Very, very, very little, despite what you hear, very little. And you're not allowed to exercise in your cell or in the pod because it can be perceived as threatening to the staff. And so then you are, then there's consequences for that. So there's very little exercise. The food is not healthy. It is not good. The most many people do is sit and watch TV and sleep. So we had martial arts that we offered in our group, which was beyond physical. That was also emotional, spiritual, intellectual, all of that stuff. And then in the women's group, we had martial arts and self-defense. so that women could leave with a sense of confidence that they could protect themselves and protect their bodies. And the Women Who Run with the Wolves curriculum helped them understand that they had a right to protect themselves and to protect their bodies. So that's just sort of a general overview of how our groups run. It is, again, as I said, far more comprehensive than what anyone would receive inside a jail. And it is unique, really unique, because it is peer-led. I think that is the most unique aspect of this. When we were in Madison, we had about 350 men and about 75 women who would come through our program each year. The recidivism rate from year to year varied from 1.5% to 3.5%. That is drastically different than the 71% that I quoted earlier. A lot of those people continued to come to the group even after they were released. They continued to call Caliph, they continued to call me. They had an ongoing support group. And they had a new community. In the group, we were regularly bringing in leaders from the community who could, I don't know what to do with that, leaders from the community who could serve as part of a larger support group. And the leaders from the community who were also formerly incarcerated. So by the time people left, they had a whole Rolodex full of numbers of people that they could call on. And they knew that every week they could come back to our group, get a meal. If they were struggling, to get food, they knew that every week they could get a meal. Every week they could get help with all of this stuff. And now they could offer their own lived experience to new people who were coming out, who were seeking help. We have 5 minutes left. Okay. I just want to show you I want to do some comparisons of how we're spending our money. Again, as I said, there's very little opportunity for any sort of reentry support services inside of jails and prisons, and they are not necessarily effective. There are 30% of people who don't come back. So, hurrah, hallelujah for that. But that is not the world we want. That is not the community that we want. I heard a quote the other day. A quote. New York Times, I don't remember who it was, but it was a poet, and he said, one of the biggest lies that we hear is that talent is rare. Talent is common. We are all talented people. We are all gifted people. We are all children of God. All of our lives have purpose. We all have passions. We are all called to serve and live out our God-given gifts. And we have an institution that is not effectively helping people to do that. And we are spending billions of dollars, well over $1 billion a year, billions of dollars throughout our nation, keeping people from living out that dream. And now we're not going to discuss whether or not that's the agenda of the institution. But the point is, we have people who are locked in cages, who are not able to be the humans that God had created them to be. And circles of support, by comparison, $400 for a 2-hour circle. That might seem high to some of you, but in order to do this well, there is training that goes into it, there's preparation that goes into it, there are guest speakers that go into it, there are meals that are created. When I was the chaplain at the jail, I cooked every one of those meals every week because we wanted to make sure that the men and women had home-cooked meals. We create community over the breaking of the bread, and we can do that over Kentucky Fried Chicken, but there's something special about a home-cooked lasagna or a pot of clam chowder. And we're raising up leaders who are going to go back into their families, back into their communities, back into their areas of work, and live out those leadership skills. So there's a lot of work that goes into producing an effective, productive circle. And as you can, as we've already illuminated or elucidated here, the 1.5% to 3.5% recidivism rate, and we are in contact with the men and women ongoing. So we know that it's not that we just haven't seen them. They are doing well. Now, we all have our own standards of success, and we all have the right to have our own standards of success. And based on each person's success that they have identified for themselves, 95% or more of the men and women who come through our group are living up to their ideals for themselves and leaving the legacy that they want to leave for their children. Let me finish.
So the idea is to expand this effort all across the county of Milwaukee. And we want to make sure that there is a circle home for everyone, both in the community and the ones returning back to the community. I get a lot of phone calls right now from men who are in the community with nowhere to go and nothing to do. And they have issues with their parole, probation officer, that kind of thing. These are simple things that we employ problem-solving skills and advice so that these guys can navigate a little bit better. So we need to make sure that we're intentional about having a home for this population of people, this targeted demographic of people. And it's important because, one, violence spreads and it reaches us all. It touches us all. At some point, it will impact everybody in this room if we don't do something to get in front of it now. That's the preventative part. And the part about the circles being peer run, that's building capacity, that's building leadership, and it's making sure that these guys are getting into something, because if we don't get them involved in something, they're going to get involved in something, if you know what I mean. Our goal is to catch them right when they come home. The first 90 days are really critical, because within the first 90 days, we can project the trajectory of how they're going to either survive the fight of returning home from prison or be defeated by it. We can project that the first 90 days. In a group we had called Voices Beyond Bars, we had a common theme amongst us called the first 90 days. We would heighten the intensity of the support for the people coming home immediately for the first 90 days. In the first 90 days, the goal is to get them into solid employment, to get them into housing, to get them involved in a circle, and something that is within their self-interest, that's productive. That's the goal of the first 90 days. And we can't do that with it being once a month, the access being limited, and that kind of thing. So this is the reason why we're here today, to implore all of you to look at this as something very serious. And we are on to something really great and revolutionizing. And I want all of you to be a part of that. And I would love to see all of you join the circle. Just sit with these men, sit with us, and break bread. I don't want it just to be me and Christa over the whole city of Milwaukee and the county. We can't do that. So the goal is to build capacity and to build leadership so that we can replicate this model all over Dane County.
Well, I want to say, if you try to envision it, if you have any experience with AA or NA or ACA groups, any of those groups, if you were to get online today and look for an AA group, you would find one today. You would probably find multiples of them today throughout the city. So you'd have some place to go. And they are all peer-run, peer-led. That's sort of the vision. I mean, the way that we do it's a little bit different, but that's the vision for the expansion of it. We are out of time. So what I want to offer, first I want to just thank Conor for inviting us today and for being our huge advocate since we arrived in Milwaukee. Thank you so much. And I know that we're out of time, but so Caliph and I are willing to stay and ask questions for those who have questions, and I know worship starts in about 10 minutes, so.
So I'd like to, if we could show our appreciation for Caliph and Christa. As you explain things, a few thoughts come to mind. One is Georgia Pa and Saroma did a lot of very good work in Milwaukee on trauma healing, and she has this beautiful phrase that pain that is not transformed is transferred. And Caliph and Christa are in the work of the transformation of people's pain from something that hurts them and hurts the community to this source of power, energy that helps heal community. And that healing isn't only confined to those who are in prison. That healing extends to the rest of us who are part of this network of healthy relationships and of walking with brothers and sisters to claim the dream of their life that God has intention for them. We find then the realization of our own dreams and authentic community. And the world is crying out for authentic community. Even here in our leafy suburbs, there are plenty of bitter fruits that are representative of us not finding authentic community. We find the path to liberation by being in community with our brothers and sisters who are going through the great struggles of finding their own healing. So that it's beneficial for all of us. And then there was one other thing. Rob Cherry's grandmother, a friend of mine, his grandmother had this great truth as well, and that is that hurt people hurt people. If we find a way to assist our brothers and sisters to heal from that hurt, it helps us with our own lives. So thank you very much. We're very grateful for the ministry that you have and for your commitment to that. And I appreciate to be in community with you in the realization of that for our wider community. And I invite anybody who's interested to be a part of Circle. It's a gift, so it is. Christa, would you close us in a short word of prayer?
I would love to.
Thank you.
I was hoping to do that.
Great.
So, yes, let us pray. Good and gracious God, we come before you this morning, giving thanks to have this morning, because every day is not a given. So we give you thanks for waking us up to this new day and for waking up all of those whom we love. We give you thanks for the possibilities and opportunities that lie before us today. And God, we pray for those who are struggling to find purpose and meaning in their lives. We give you thanks for the people who are gathered here today to learn more about this important work, for the people who care about the men and women and children whose lives are impacted by incarceration. And God, we pray also for those people who have loved ones who are incarcerated today. We ask for healing all around. We ask for your blanket of healing over this community, over this city, over the families and the individuals. God, you sent us a sign in Jesus, in the cross, and letting us know that the end is never the end, that God always has more in store for us. And so we give you thanks that the dismal facts and figures and stories that we share today are not the end, that God, the God who is God of all of us and called by many names, is always at work making the impossible possible. So God, we ask that you continue to bless this congregation, you continue to bless Caliph and I in our work, you continue to bless all of those whom we serve. And we ask this in the name of the one who himself was arrested and incarcerated and who died a political death. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.